Is your consulting or coaching designed around what you're best at, what you love doing, and what people actually want to pay you for? We'll find out on today's Consulting Matters podcast. And welcome to the Consulting Matters podcast. This is the show for purpose-driven transformational consultants and coaches who are ready to own the power of what they do and their strengths and position themselves for the clients, the impact and income that they are ready for. I am Betsy Jordan, and I am both a business mentor and a brand messaging and positioning strategist. You can find out about all the things that I do to help my clients build thriving consulting or coaching businesses that they and their clients love on my website at www.betsyjordan.com. And don't forget, Jordan is with a Y. So today we are talking about one of my favorite topics and the best part of my brand positioning and messaging strategy, or one of the best parts. I keep saying that they're all best parts, but what I really love is this work I do with my clients and what we're going to talk about today, which is all about best at strengths. Specifically, we're going to talk about how to mine and then monetize them, which isn't just to make you happier. It's to make you more productive, more profitable, and best of all, instantly stand out in the crowded consulting and coaching marketplace, and so much more. So when you tune in, you're going to discover what best at strengths are and how there aren't just the things that you're good at. We're also going to get into why your best at strengths are incredibly hard to see, value, and appreciate. How taking your best at strengths will seriously change both your life and your client's life. The steps you can take right now to start the process of mining and then monetizing what ultimately brings your clients the most value and you the most joy. And of course, as always, if you need my help in terms of uncovering your own strengths or figuring out how to monetize them and how to get you paid for consulting or coaching that is really in your zone of genius, I'd love to help you out. Head on over to my website at www.betsyjordan.com, and you're going to see a big pink button at the top where it says free strategic clarity call. Go ahead, hit that button, and let's have a conversation. So let's get into the conversation about best at strengths, specifically here. So what are best at strengths and what are they not? So we're going to start with what they're not. There's three things that can look like your best at strengths, but are not your best at strengths. So number one, your best at strength is not your knowledge base. That is your expertise. I did an episode on the 3 types of expertise that consultants and coaches typically have. It's episode 147, and if you missed it, definitely go back and tune in there. But your best at strengths are also not your skills. So a skill is anything that you do with proficiency to get things done. So we have skills that we do all the live long day. So if you think about I have a skill right now where I'm doing my podcast right now. So I have some levels of skills around that, but I also made lunch for myself. There's a lot of things that I did where I opened up my computer. Those are all skills. There's lots of skills that we have as it relates to our expertise and what we do in service of our expertise. So we might be consultants and we might have meeting facilitation as a skill set that we have. So that may or may not be our strength per se. They're just activities that we do. But speaking of activities, they aren't the activities that you're just simply good at or competent at or even can do with excellence. So they're not the things that you know. They're not these granular skills that we would have to do anyway, no matter what our job is, because they're all part of our job. And there also aren't those activities or tasks that we simply are good at or competent in. It's the activities that we are best at. So when you think about the zone of your genius or your best at strengths, it's the things that you do that are so amazing and that they energize you and fulfill you and gets you noticed and appreciated by others. That is the zone of best at strengths. So to make it clearer, let's talk about the strengths expert, Marcus Buckingham. This is what he said in Go Put Your Strengths to Work. He says a strength is something that you love to do, that you're good at it, you're drawn to it, you keep naturally developing your ability at it, you're fully engaged when you're doing it, and after you're done, you feel fulfilled and authentic. And he says, bottom line about a strength makes you feel strong. So if you're somebody like me who, has to be competent with numbers because, I'm a business owner and all, but whenever I get into numbers, I feel like my brain starts to hurt. That's how that is for sure not a strength because it's not making me feel strong. But when I'm helping somebody frame up ideas, it makes me feel strong because I'm in my zone of genius. So speaking of zone of genius, that's another way we could look at what our best at strengths are. So Gay Hendricks in The Big Leap defines your zone of genius are the things that you love doing and are exceptionally talented at, as opposed to the other zones. So he talked about the zone of incompetence, the things that we all want to stay away from, the things that you're not good at and you don't really like. The zone of competence, is things that you can do, but others can do it better. Or the zone of excellence, which is the things that you can do very well, but do not love, which can lead to burnout. So those are the different levels. The zone of genius are the things that you love, you're great at, people love it when you do it. That's the zone of genius. That's what we want to get to in our consulting or coaching business. But the way I look at it is I look at them as like your innate gifts and genius. So in terms of like, it's this thing that you've had your whole life, so the root word of genius means divine attendant spirit given at birth. So I believe it's something that you are born with, something that you've always possessed. So to me, it's not that we're trying to get to our zone of genius. I feel like it's something about like unpacking everything else that we're doing, to be ruthless about the things that are not it, so that this part of us that's naturally there can shine. So the thing about the zone of genius, if you're talking about it as like you got to get to it, it seems like, okay, this is something aspirational rather than looking at something that you are born with, and it's going back to your native way of being, the type of person and the things that you've always done throughout your life that you're so good at it, but you don't recognize it because it becomes so naturally. You don't realize you're so good at it because they come so naturally to you. That to me is what your innate gifts and genius are, what you're best at strengths for. So the thing about strengths, I had done an episode on strengths a couple of years ago, and I said something about like strengths evolve over time. But my thinking has evolved on this one is I don't think that your strengths evolve over time. I think your expertise can shift and change over time as you develop new types of expertise. But I think your authentic best at strengths remain the same throughout your life. You just might get better at them or find new ways to express them, but the core essence of them are encoded in you. So this is what I believe are the filters that would tell you like how you're in the zone of your best at strength is that you love it and you're great at it. It has to be both. So you have picture like a 2x2 matrix, like in the upper right quadrant is like you excel at it and you love it. That's your best at strength versus like what you're good at, which is you excel at it and you don't love it. Like you don't want to do that. If you love it, but you don't excel at it, that's more of a hobby. And if you don't love it and you don't excel at it, it's a weakness. Stay away from it. But when you think about what you are looking for in terms of the best at strength is in terms of the love, is that you have an instinct for whatever it is that this activity is. You're drawn to it. You learn it relatively easy. You can master it. It makes you happy. When you're done doing it, it fills your cup and you feel strong. But also the other side is the impact in others. Others recognize this strength. They value it and you get these consistent near perfect results. So that's my definition of best at strengths. So it's not completely different than what Marcus Buckingham might talk about or Gay Hendricks. But I look at it as this is a very innate thing about who you are. So does my strength definition or my best at strength definition resonate with you? Where do we align? Is there something I'm missing? I'm really curious about strengths. Like this has been a really big part of this program and this workbook that I've been working on for the last 6 months and really trying to get this right. And so it's important to me that I am really unpacking this whole idea of strengths because I think that is such a key path to our purpose, our profits, and so much more. So if you do think that there's a big gap in my definition, or if you have a comment that you would love to add, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like, please email me at betsy@betsykjordan.com or tag me on a post in LinkedIn, and I'd love to have a conversation about this. So I'd love to get your opinions. Please add to my definitions. Correct me if you think that I'm not seeing something correctly. I'd love to hear from you. So now let's get into the second point, why our best at strengths are so incredibly hard to see, let alone value and leverage. The first one is about our negativity bias of our brain and our world. Like I've been really thinking a lot about this because, I'm somebody like you, we're growth oriented. We always look for how can we improve? How can we improve? How can we improve? But when you think about it from that standpoint, we're always looking for what's wrong with us, what's not working. Our world at large and our brain, is always looking at how do we manage our weaknesses, rather than finding and activating strengths. Think about it from the time that you're young, you have a report card, and if you get all A's on a report card, but you get that one B, what does everybody focus on? Is that one B? When you go into your workplace and you get a performance review, you have all these things that you do really well, but there's this one quote unquote area of opportunity, where are we focused on? Therapy culture, how it's like all over social media. Like, how long are you going to hear like more things about all the ways that we're wrong? You go to church or other religious institutions and you hear about like original sin and all the things that we're doing wrong. Like we're almost like living our lives like on this nonstop like sin hunt, trauma hunt, like what's wrong with us, rather than what's right with us. What are we doing well? What do we do that creates value for other people? Like we have this negativity bias. So I feel like that's like the number one. Normally I didn't have this in there before because I hadn't really thought about it. But the more I really think about the strengths, like, why is it so hard to see? And it's like, wow, because we are so trained to see everything that's not working, so I know I have action items that are coming later on in this episode. But to me, there's like just a really quick action right now to help us see our strengths and see a whole bunch of other things that are going good in our businesses is just take a moment right now and think about like, what are all the things that you're doing right? What are all the things that you are doing that is making a difference? What do you do every day that's creating value? If you could start getting yourself out of that negativity bias, like I'm definitely sure that you're going to be able to get yourself more on the path of seeing your strengths. Instead of saying, gee, I could have done this better, think about like, what did I do that was really great? And how do I really just sit with what did I do that was so great and how do I savor and celebrate those things? So the reason number one is the negativity bias. And I just gave you a little mini action item on that one. Here's the second reason is we have a lot of pressure in our world and probably from our survival brains as well to conform, not stand out. So many of us come from organizations in the world of competency models and performance management where we're all like held to a standard, a singular standard. And we got judged and promoted and paid for how well we conformed, not stand out. Think about what I even like somebody like me who's done tons of competency models. And now I'm like rethinking the whole thing because, what does a competency model do? Is it creates a perfect person that may or may not exist. Like these are the idealized competencies we all should strive for, whether they support our strengths or not, or whether they're validated in terms of like, yeah, these are the behaviors that actually will make a difference. So we create these competency models. Now we're all evaluated against it. And there's this expectation that we're all supposed to conform, not stand out. Like I remember when I first got to Disney, I had a cultural mentor who told me straight up that the best way to stand out in the Disney culture was to fit in. So if you're in the leadership development space, like think about how many times we are brought in to help leaders be more like other leaders and fit into those standardized competencies. Now, I'm not saying like, let's throw competency models out the window, like that there's no value, but we have to be careful around like, are we really talking about like behaviors that really make sense and can everybody use their own strengths to get to those behaviors? Or is it that we're trying to make everybody into one? And the consequences when we think about like this pressure to conform, not stand out, is we're trained to hide our true selves and our unique strengths or just ignore them and do our best to take on somebody else's version of the strengths we think we should have in order to get the raises and promotions we want. Like a lot of times in my brand positioning and messaging that I work with my clients on, there's this thing of like, oh, but if I do this, I'll make more money. There's a perception of like, this is more monetizable than something else, but everything is monetizable. But the best path to your monetization is your authentic strengths. And that's a really hard thing because it goes against everything that we've been trained and rewarded for. The other reason why your strengths are so hard to see is the curse of the zone of competence, even excellence. So using the Gay Hendricks model is like the things that we're good at and we actually could be excellent at. And the problem that we have there is that we can do something with these particular skill sets, or these particular strengths, if you will, but they're not our best at strengths. So the problem is that we feel like that if I don't use this, like I can, then I'm leaving money and opportunity on the table rather than realizing the impact on this one. So I'll talk about myself in this particular curse of the zone of competence. When it comes to where I fit into the when I was a consultant and in the life cycle of a consulting engagement, I was really good on the front end. I was really good at helping the executives like frame up what they were dealing with, what they wanted, get the executive team on the same page. I was really good on the front end and the analysis around like, okay, here's what's going on, here's the root cause, here's the roadmap. After that, I stopped being as effective, particularly when it moved into the project phase, where we have the project teams and I have to do all this process leadership. But the problem is that I could land those second and third contracts, and I like the challenge. Like, I like landing the clients, but the work was not a fit for me. And so the problem is like now I'm in all of this like in-depth consulting implementation kind of work, and I'm not loving it. Like it was draining the life out of me. And so that's the problem with the zone of competence, is that we can do it, but it comes at a cost. And that's like a lot of our energy. And I knew a lot of this at the beginning when I was first starting my consulting business. Like, I had interviewed a bunch of people. The reason why I named my business Accelera is because I interviewed one of my favorite clients, and she told me in this conversation, she's like, you're really good at taking an existing fire and making it burn brighter and stronger. And she's like, but when we get deeper, like into the projects and deeper in the organization or working with leaders who are struggling, like you're not as good at that. Like you're competent, but you're not good at it, and then as you go deeper into it, you actually kind of move into like, you're not good at that. And that was really good insight that I completely ignored when I started my business, because it's like, oh, scarcity, I can do all of this. I better take advantage of every opportunity, not recognizing the psychic cost. I talk a lot about my story about like how I built the wrong business and how I burned out. And I think a lot of the reason why I burned out is that it wasn't like consulting was completely the wrong business, but there's a lot of aspects of like what I offered and how I positioned myself that I worked in my zone of competence and even excellence that wasn't always in my zone of genius. And then that led me to a burnout. So it's really important that you are aware of why it's hard to see your best at strengths, and how the zone of competence and excellence can really blind you from it, because you're so focused on like, well, I could do this, I could do that, I could do a lot of things, I could do all of these things, and they all can make money. But the biggest reason why it's really, really hard to see our strengths is because of the nature of the strengths. And that's because we have the nose to the window pane syndrome. Like, we are so close to our strengths, like it's that whole, like, you can't read the label from inside a jar syndrome. Like, we're too close to ourselves. We don't see ourselves the way other people see us. And our strengths aren't even necessarily just like what we do, but they're integral, to who we are. When we're in our zone of genius, what we do is in flow. We lose track of time. We can get lost in what we're doing. It doesn't even feel like work, so we discount it, or assume everybody else can do what we do. That's why when I say that the real key that you're in your zone of genius and you're dealing with your strengths is when somebody says, oh my gosh, you did this so well. And you're like, it's just nothing, forget it. And it's just so interesting how easy it is to discount these things and not see them. I'm in the middle of writing all of this stuff about strengths, and I got this wonderful, wonderful WhatsApp message from one of my clients. And she was going on about how much she values me and how much she appreciates my strengths, and how I helped her see herself before she was able to see herself, and what was possible for her business. And I didn't even really respond to her message. It's one of those things I've been sitting with for the last few days of like, I really need to get back to her, because it's almost like it's like we're too vulnerable, like if people really see us and they mirror back what we're really great at, they really see the core of us, and so it could feel super vulnerable. So those are the 4 reasons. There's probably others. And if you can relate to those reasons, think about like why for you it might be hard for you to see your own strengths. Like, how do these reasons resonate with you? Is there anything else that you would add to my list? Same drill for what I'm missing. Email me or tag me on a post on LinkedIn. I'd love to have a dialogue around this. I'd love to know your experience with what is working for you to help you really uncover your best at strengths, and what is standing in your way, what questions you have about best at strengths. This is such a passion area for me, and I would love, love, love to hear more from you. Okay, so now we're on to key point 3, which is the impact of taking our strengths seriously. Or actually, let me say it this way. The impact of taking our strengths seriously and the impact of not taking our strengths seriously. Where what's at stake? This is that whole conversation around like, why is this necessary? Why do I need to uncover my strengths? Why do I need to take them seriously? And number 1, you need to take them seriously is because your strengths are what your best clients are actually paying you for, even if their decision to choose you is on a deep unconscious level. So I've told this story before on the podcast. In case you missed it, I'm going to tell it again. But one thing was really interesting to me is when I was pivoting from a consulting business to working with consultants and coaches, I interviewed Brad, who I've worked with at Disney and post Disney as a consultant. And I was asking him about, why do executives hire consultants and coaches? And the conversation was so interesting. So he was going on and telling me about how there was like all these different situations that I worked really well where, either he had a lot of ideas and I could dig into his head and organize it, or how, there was an executive team and they were all over the place and I was able to go in and frame what everybody was dealing with. And he kept talking about like my ability to frame ideas and frame things. And I'm like, well, Brad, that is so interesting. But like, what about my master's in OD? And he's like, oh, I don't care about that. I'm like, okay, what about all my experience in OD? He's like, I don't care about that. And it really helped me see in a much clearer frame for me is that why people hire me isn't always for what I think that they're hiring me for. And a lot of times it's for my strengths. So this is going on underneath the surface. And if you don't see that, you're going to miss out on opportunities that are right in front of you around like, why do clients really want to hire you? And I thought that they always wanted to hire me for my expertise. And it's almost like that's the price of admission. The real thing is the strengths that I'm bringing that they don't have, or that's just something that I'm bringing to the table that they don't have, or maybe they have it, but they are too close to it themselves and they can maybe do it for other people, but they can't do it for, for themselves. Like that's one of the things that I really love about my partnership or my colleague relationship, friendship with Carol Cox. She's one of those people who have a similar gift. So she runs Speaking Your Brand, and she's really good at helping people sort and organize ideas for signature talks, where I do the same thing for branding. And she's the one I would turn to when I have a lot of complex ideas, because sometimes you just can't do it for yourself. So your clients are coming to you. People are always coming to you on this unconscious level because you probably have some strengths that they need, whether you have something that they don't, or you might have the same thing, but they can't do for themselves what they need you to do. So that's what's going on anyway. So that's one reason why it's super important that you take your strengths seriously, because this is going on anyway. Another reason why you need to take your strengths seriously and monetize them is this is how you get your business and results into flow. So facts are, when you use your strengths, things are easier. You get a lot more done in less time versus perceived less time. Like you are much more efficient when you're doing things that you love. It takes you a lot longer to do things that you're competent in. It definitely takes you a lot longer to do things that you don't love. And in fact, let's be honest, the things that we don't love, we avoid, we procrastinate on. Your strengths lead to better results, leading to more raving fans who sing your praises. And the thing about it from this other standpoint is we are here. A lot of us mid-career professionals get into consulting or coaching because we want to have more work-life balance. We want to have more in our personal lives. So when you spend more of your time in your zone of genius and your strengths, that actually gives you energy for the other parts of your life versus taking it away, which will make that work-life balance, even if you have more time that you have for your hobbies and for your family and other things, it will take away from that if you are not having that energy to be present. So this is the perk, of our riding the waves of business ownership, is that we want to have work-life balance. A great way to get it faster is use your strengths because they give you energy for all the other parts of your life. The other reason why you need to take your strengths seriously is that if you are confused on what is the right business for you, your strengths will show you the way. So I've been talking a lot on the show recently about the messy middle. And when I was in what I would call my liminal space purgatory, it took me forever to position or repivot my business from consulting that I had long outgrown to what I called brand X, is I was in this fog, and I did not know how to get out of it. I was just stuck. And I was throwing good money after bad. And I'm like, okay, I got to start listening. I got to start paying attention to what people are actually coming to me for. I need to ask more questions. And I needed to find more clarity on what actually how was I wired and what did I wanted to do? So even if I didn't have clarity on my entire vision, I can mine my strengths, and I use that as a way to point me, towards the right business. It was like a process to uncover what they were and figure out what were they indicating for me? It was sort of like my strengths were leading the way, and I got clarity. I mentioned on one of those top strengths, was my framing ideas. Framing and positioning ideas and concepts is a consistent compliment that I've gotten throughout my whole career. It's like, oh my gosh, you're so good. You organize these ideas. Like I got it when I facilitated meetings. I got it in my one-on-one coaching sessions with my executives. And this is what I do all day long with my clients now. Like I look for the strategic frame. This is how I position you in the market. I frame ideas to help you clarify, like, okay, so this is what you want. I do that all day long. I also have my strengths whispering gifts. Like, I don't know how I do this. Like, I sort of like feel into what people's strengths are and what they're supposed to do. That was a compliment that I got from one of my clients who she's like, I don't know how you sense this in me. I'm like, I don't know either. To be honest, like, it's just this thing I do. And people say all the time about like, oh my gosh, Betsy, help me find the words. And once I had that, I didn't actually know at the time, like, oh, well, what I'm really doing is brand positioning and messaging. Like, I didn't have that, but I had an arrow that sort of pointed me in that direction. And so it was like my encodings that allowed me to trust that, yes, even though brand positioning and messaging is very, very different than consulting, but what I was able to see is the strengths that I had that made me a successful consultant. I can rejiggy them in a way that would make sense in this newer world and this passion that I had about activating, the purpose of consultants and coaches, so I was able to do that. And if you go to my website, they have a whole page on success stories. I think the URL is betsydordan.com success-stories. This is where my testimonials are. You'll see over and over again, people will say the same thing about me. However I got them to the outcome, it's going to be one of those areas of my strengths or my zone of genius. So that's another reason why you want to take them seriously. And then the last one is differentiation. One of the things I'm really clear about now that I wasn't before is that your strengths are what sets you apart from others who share your expertise. I should have known this. Like when I was an internal OD consultant at Disney, we literally shared the exact same expertise, processes, methods, scripts, accountabilities, and we were held accountable to them. But what separated all of us OD consultants, I think there was like 25 of us or something like that. We were all over property. And what made us separate out and what got us into certain rooms, what clients we resonated with was our strengths. And it even showed up in our nicknames for each other. So Luis was the professor. The team and clients looked to him to ensure the intellectual consistency of our approaches. Gina was the rebel. She's always looking at ideas from this out of the box perspective. So teams and clients looked to her. Bill came out of a finance background, so he was much more of a pragmatist. So people looked to him for the in the box solutions. I was nicknamed the model lady, because of my weird quirk of organizing ideas. So that all makes sense, right? So differentiation is based on our strengths, even if we have the same expertise. Now, I do believe that if you label your expertise correctly, they do provide a certain level of differentiation, but your strengths for sure take it all the way home. So one of the things that I have in one of my episodes is I talk about your unique title. And in the unique title, it's really clarifying, like, how you might show up. Like, because you could have two different people with the same expertise in, let's say, executive leadership, but one's a strategist and coach, versus a transformation guide. The strengths will give a different flavor on what that means around executive development, or business development or anything that you might do. Like your strengths gives a different way of how you partner with your clients and a different way of how you show up and how you work together. I have lots of lean and continuous improvement people that I am connected to because of the work that I've done with Katie Anderson. And so like lean and continuous improvement as an expertise was new to me, but what's been interesting for me is to get to know all these different people with these different perspectives. Like they all are so different in terms of their strengths. Like some are great at the systems and structure aspect, but not Katie. Katie's best at creating these engaging learning experiences. So your strengths are what makes you stand out. And here's the good news I would say about strengths. So I'm just saying this, is that strengths are what tells me that there's room for all of us. Like I think competition is an illusion because there has to be a reason why we all have these different strengths. And they think that there's room for all of us at the table because of all of these differences of what we're bringing that our clients don't have. So those are the reasons why you need to take your strengths seriously. So just love for you to reflect on this before we move on to the steps. Like, are you ready to mind and take your strengths seriously? And if no, what's holding you back? So now let's get into the final point of this episode, which is to mine your best at strengths. So before we begin, I want to be clear on what you're mining for. And I want you to use the analogy of the gold rush. So back in the day, there were all these miners who were rushing to go out west to mine for gold. And so the best and most successful miners knew the difference between real gold and fool's gold. So they had their list of criteria about the color, shape, and other things that they could decide very quickly what they've mined, so that they didn't waste time going in the wrong direction. They didn't waste money going in the wrong direction, and they made it smarter decisions about where to invest their energy. So this principle holds true if you think about your best at strengths as a mining operation. So here's the criteria to be paying attention to. The real gold of your strengths include you love it and you're great at it. You cannot not do it. It's like as natural as breathing. It's how your quirky brain is wired. You get a compliment on what you did and you instantly blow it off with, it's nothing. You try to teach it to someone else and you struggle because you're not exactly sure how you did it. And you do it for free. Actually, you're doing it for free all the time. False gold is that you're good at it, maybe even excellent at it, but you don't love it. It drains you. Or you love it, but you're not great at it. And even if you got lots of training, you're only going to improve just a little. So don't be fooled. Be ruthless like those successful miners. They didn't waste time on pirate. It's time to mine for gold. So you're clear on these principles. Let's move on. So the first step I want you to do is just start paying attention. So pay attention to all the themes of your life. Marcus Buckingham calls this the red thread. And so that is what we're looking for. And I'm going to give you 4 data sources of where you can find the red thread about your strengths. Data source number 1 is your native way of being. So I'd love for you to just picture yourself as a child or a teenager, the school projects you did for fun, the other activities that you would say you were drawn to naturally. You lost track of time. You were praised for. You picked up and mastered with relative ease. You just love doing it. You look forward to doing it. Just think about yourself as that person. And then move beyond your childhood to the second data source, which is your greatest career successes of all time. Like capture the big ones, like the things that you did that were amazing, the 5 to 10 career successes of all time, and pay attention to the activities behind those successes in terms of your contribution. Like what did you do to create these successes that related to what you loved and played a critical role in that success story. The third data source is now more in the present. I just want you to pay attention to your recent best days of work. Think about the last time you were doing something that you were drawn to it. You loved doing it. You lost track of time. You were praised for it. And then think about your patterns of praise in general. So pay attention to the consistent compliments you've received over the course of your life that you blew off or minimized. When people said, oh my God, you're so good at it, or how did you do this, or thank you so much. Now, again, in this part, we're not looking for compliments on your work habits or what others who share your expertise would do in the situation similar to what you did. We want to look at what you uniquely did. What were the things that people said, I can't believe you did that? That's what you're paying attention to. Then find the through line. What have been your natural and innate abilities that you've loved and best at and have spanned the course of your life? We don't want to look at just like point in time right now. We want to look at you holistically. So I've shared with you, around like my best at strengths around this framing thing. I've been doing that ever since I was a kid. Like, I don't know why I got really excited about learning how to do an outline when I was like in, middle school or something like that. It's like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing ever. I've always been that person. My client Adam, he's like always this person who people come to where he was like always coming up with not out of the box ideas. He was always shifting people's perspective. Like if you go into a meeting with Adam and he has like a water bottle, he's always like saying, but what if we look at it this way? To flip the water bottle with the lid on, upside down. That's always who he is. Chris is the one who is always coming up with out-of-box ideas. Sarah, who I had on the podcast like a few episodes ago, she's the one who started her business right the first time. She's the one who had has an expertise in helping transform these rental spaces into revenue. But her best at strengths is she is great at influencing people to part with money. That's a big part of the success story she had around that whole thing of what she's been able to do and how she helps her clients. Debbie's always been somebody who makes up and tells stories. So she was like that person growing up, even when she went to work as a garbage consultant for a little while. Like what made her stand out is she was able to tell these like dry presentations with stories. And then eventually she became a therapist and she was really good at telling stories and helping people uncover their stories, and then she became an artist. Like, it's always been her thing, is telling stories. So think about like the red thread, the through line throughout your whole life. And then step 3 is take all of this in, take it seriously. Don't minimize it. Don't blow it off. Receive the gift of what you're best at and the way people appreciate you for it. I definitely need to go back to that client who gave me that really nice WhatsApp message. But just pay attention to what you are giving in terms of the gift that you've been given at birth and the gift that people are giving you in terms of mirroring that for you. I get it. It makes us feel vulnerable to be seen at that level and to be appreciated for the truth of who we are. But if you're going to monetize what you're best at and love, and that makes the biggest impact, you're going to have to get used to this. So take it seriously. And then step 4 is use that insight. Translate your lifelong innate talents to your consulting or coaching by using that intel to define the type of partner you are to your clients, the role you want to play with them. Use that insight to articulate your differentiators, but most importantly, prioritize the products and services to include as you're designing your offers. Like, make sure that they are aligned to your strengths, because truth is there's so many ways to deliver your consulting or coaching expertise. And some ways leverage your strengths better than others. There's lots of different categories of different ways that you can frame up offers. Like, there's one-on-one consulting or coaching, there's group experiences, they're product-based, there's project-based, there's done-for-you services. And within each category type, there's like specifics. So with one-on-one type of consulting or coaching, there's coaching sessions, there's mentoring, there's advisory, there's strategy. With groups, you can offer group coaching, keynotes, strategic facilitation, and retreats, and so much more. Like, there's many ways to slice and dice the way that you frame up your products and services. But it's up to you to design the solution that leverages your best at strengths to optimally solve your client's problem and help them achieve their goals and makes you happy. So you want to do both. Like, you want to be able to use your strengths to make an impact on your client and helping them get to where they want to go, helping them achieve their aspirations, become who they want to be, at the same time using what lights you up, what comes naturally to you. The right framing for your offers is what hits this sweet spot between their needs and your joy. One of my favorite quotes on this is from Frederick Buechner, who said, "The place that God calls you is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet." And that's where you have to trust that your gifts are given to you for a reason. Some of it is to make you happy. Some of it's to make you more impactful. And you have to trust that that same encoding that you have that makes you happy is going to be what actually solves your client's problem in the best way possible. It's going to make the biggest impact on them and is what's going to create the greatest joy, energy, and strength in you. Okay, so it's time to reflect. Are you actually monetizing your best at strengths in your consulting or coaching business? And if no, what steps did you miss? So those are the main points for today. Let me recap what we discussed. Number 1, your best at strengths aren't what you're good at, but what you're best at. It's what you love and what creates value for others. The old nose to the window pane syndrome is usually the primary culprit that makes it hard for us to see our strengths clearly, among other things, but the nose to window pane syndrome is the biggie. And if you want to monetize your best at strengths, you have to choose to make it happen. It won't happen without strategic intent, or it won't happen as quickly. So let's take some action here. So what I'd love for you to do is, number 1, pay attention. Just start noticing. Pay attention to your best days at work, to the compliments that you blow off, and then take seriously whatever you uncover. And of course, work with me to help you package your strengths along with your expertise and passion into a brand strategy that positions you for the clients and opportunities you're ready for. Book a call with me and let's chat. So that is it for today's episode. If you enjoyed it, please rate or review it on Apple or wherever you're listening. Definitely subscribe so you don't miss another episode. And until next time, thanks so much for listening.